All right, so got a couple of things right here. I'm just gonna ask just kind of a few general questions about like where you were born and where you grew up. So I don't know which one of you guys wants to go first.
I was born in a little town, Prairie City, Oregon.
It sounds little.
Well, it's right up against the Wallowa Mountains over in eastern Oregon. And I was born in 1948, about 4 days after Israel became a nation.
Wow.
I was born in Bend, Oregon, which is in central Oregon. Yeah, beautiful place. And we lived in Sisters, which was like a little outskirts town of Bend. But Bend had the St. Charles Hospital. I was born March 13th, 1946. It's almost 72 years ago.
72 years young. Right? So, did you guys have very many siblings, or were you only children, or?
I had an older sister and a younger brother, so I was the middle
Child.
I was the young one. I had two older brothers. We're all 2 years apart. They had completely different interests than I did. So
They were more the brainy scientist type geeks. And Bill was the
sportsy,
sportsy.
chase girls and drive cars.
So I think this talk you mentioned that. Were you in the National Guard?
Yeah, I was in the National Guard I joined before I got out of high school, because at the time they had a program that if you joined before you were 18 and a half, it would cut your military time in half. But somewhere along the line we signed dotted line, and so I spent 6 years.
I was thinking it was 4, but yeah, maybe it was
6 years.
by the time. Yeah.
But it was all National Guard. I'd go 2 weeks in the summer for summer camp, go up to Yakima Firing Center or Fort Lewis and play Army for 2 weeks.
Play Army. But you did say, so you just joined, you weren't drafted or anything, but it was...
No. At 64, when I joined, there was nothing, there wasn't even a Vietnam going on.
Oh, yes, there was, actually. We just did, it wasn't escalated to the point where they were, mandatory drafting going on.
There was a bunch of us that joined because we wanted to fulfill our military obligation and go to school and get married and stuff like that. So that was the best way to do it. And then at the time when I was in high school, when you turned 18, you had to register for the draft, which everybody did. So it was basically a lottery. When your number came up, you got drafted. So usually if you were in college, you get a deferment. So that, and as long as you kept your grades up. If your grades went down, you had a better chance of getting drafted.
It's good motivation.
Incentive,
Incentive to do good.
Yeah, so because you were in the National Guard, were you never sent overseas or anything? Did you do anything? Or?
No. Like I say, I went to basic training in Fort Ord, California. I protected Presidio Monterey. I protected Yakima Firing Center. I protected Fort Lewis.
In Tacoma, Washington.
Tacoma, Washington. Protected a lot of places, but I never did overseas.
He was supposed to spend all of his basic training down in Monterey, California, but they had a meningitis outbreak down there. So that was kind of scary. So they eventually evacuated that whole barracks.
Wow.
Because it was spreading. So
The whole fort. They closed the fort down. We were the second to last company to go through Fort Ord.
So that's why you ended up at Fort Lewis up in Tacoma, Washington, for the remainder of your.
Well, I was on the job training.
Mm-hmm.
So, with it, you said like basic training. What was that? What does that entail? Really, is that just? physical training? And
You learn how to say yes, sergeant, no, sergeant. Yes, sir, no, sir. You gotta shine your shoes.
And they exercise.
It's
you
a lot
to-
of it's just a lot of training. Mostly, training for like rifle training, shooting, everything to deal with the Army, what you do in the Army, kind of. It was okay.
Kind of like boot camp.
Yeah, it was boot camp. You go through a lot of different training sessions. That has to do with military.
So do you have any specific memories from that time? Or anything, any particular instructors or something that?
No, I was very fortunate because I had asthma, and luckily, because of the meningitis, they didn't make you double time everywhere. In other words, double time, and you had to run everywhere.
Oh.
If I had had to do that, I would have gotten out on a medical discharge. But everywhere we went, we walked. March, and then what made it even harder was just down at Fort Ord, everything was sand. You're marching in sand, and that's like, especially with boots on.
His legs were like muscle.
Full pack of stuff on your back and your rifle and everything that you own. Memories. I remember the memories of songs that they played. Like when we're in the mess hall, because that was one of the only times that you had to really enjoy doing nothing. And yet you had to eat and get out.
We wrote letters to each other. That was kind of neat because I think we kind of got to know each other in a way we may not have if we'd been together. So we had lots of letters back and forth, and I remember riding my bicycle down to the train station to put my letter in the box by the train station because that was supposed to be the ones that went out the first or something. I don't know. So yeah, we wrote a lot of letters.
That's about
No
it.
email, no
So
stuff,
you met at the time. Was it just a friendship at that point, or were you kind
Yeah.
of intentionally courting?
Well,
or
we
anything?
were
Just-
sort of thinking that we were going to get married at some point, but we were pretty young. So.
She was the one.
Yep.
Like we said Jeannie said at the, or we said at the anniversary party that I remember after going down to the carnival and going up on the hill. We lived up on the hill and you could see the whole town and stuff. And that was when Jeannie said, "Bill, I love you." She was the first girl that ever said that to me. And I knew that was the one.
Yeah. It was funny, a little story about those letters we wrote to each other. Of course, we kept them all. And so after we got married and we were expecting first baby, I found that I had sewn them to get into a pillowcase, kind of a fancy little pillow, decorative pillow. So all these letters were stuffed inside. And so one night we thought, we better burn these.
Wow.
Because once we have kids, they might end up, blackmailing us or something. So one night we started a fire in the fireplace and just pitched them all. I think maybe we saved one or two, but
Burned all the
it
embarrassing
was
things.
so funny reading those letters after all those years later. It was like, oh my gosh.
Well,
Such a
when I grew
stupid
up,
thing to say.
my dad was worked for the U.S. Forest Service, so I think we only lived in a couple of towns until I was probably in junior high. And most of the times we lived on a ranger station, some isolated ranger station, which was really neat because us three kids could explore and do all kinds of stuff. And we lived down on the Oregon coast in a ranger station called Agnes, Oregon. And the only way you could get there in the winter was with a jet boat up the Rogue River. which at that time, that was a long time ago. They had jet boats down there when I was 2 or 3 years old, so that was 46, 47, 48.
That's
And
when they
they-
got their mail and everything.
Yeah,
It's like,
that
Wow.
was actually the mailboat,
Yeah.
the mail deliverer, and now it's an attraction. I mean, you have to book,
you have to pay to go.
Pay to get up there.
pay to come up the river on a jet boat. But I remember a lot of times the Coquille River and the Rogue River would come together just at Agnes, and in the springtime when the thaw would happen, it would flood, and actually it took the bridge out one year, and the
Wow.
bridge was way up above the river, long ways above the river. So there was a lot of water coming down there.
We gotta get back onto the military
No.
question.
That's fine. It's just not
This is
just add to
history.
it. Yeah, it's
We
just history.
jumped ahead from childhood to military.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you guys go to the same school or something? Is that you met or?
In high school, yeah, we did. Yeah. He was 2 years ahead, and we didn't actually know each other until he graduated. On his graduation night was our first date. so yeah.
Well, first date was annual signing party
Well, yeah.
at the cafeteria,
Okay. Yeah.
and then I took her to the graduation.
Party thing afterwards. Yeah. So that was kind of how we got to know each other. But he went off to the National Guard boot camp thing right after. Pretty much was it that fall?
It was August, yeah,
Uh-huh.
August or September.
Yeah.
So instead of going into
64.
college, I went to Fort Ord.
Did you go to college eventually, or?
Yeah,
did
I
you just
went,
sort of-
I started in Eastern Oregon College, which is a little town, LeGrand, Oregon. It's like 45 miles from Baker. And the first year I went there, I actually commuted to and from the school. We had like 6 or 8 people or more that went to LeGrand, and we formed a carpool. So we take our car once a week and then ride the other 4 days. But it was a washout. I wasn't ready for college, and I first year I was in basically on probation, because I got terrible grades. I was like a 0.6. I just wasn't ready for college. It was just like, it's not for me. Or I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to be a CPA, and there's a lot of things I wanted to do. My grandfather was a mortician. He had a hardware store.
I would never marry him. No way.
And I
I saw-
almost did that. Almost went to school in Portland to be, a mortician, and then
Just can't imagine.
changed my mind. And my mom was happy too. But I wanted to be a CPA, and then when I got in college, I realized there was a lot of math involved in it, and I wasn't really that type of a math. I wasn't a math type person. I was more of a business administration type person. So when I transferred to Portland State, I think maybe 2 or 3 classes went with me, and the rest of it was like starting all over again, because my GPA was so low. And so I spent the next 4 years getting my GPA up, and graduated in 1970.
Was it 70?
Yeah, 1970.
Okay.
But we got married in 67, so spent a lot of years going to college,
And
fixing
working.
dinners. But I worked full-time. I worked at a stock exchange, and I'd get off at 2 o'clock, and then I'd walk up to Portland State. Jeanne worked at Portland State, so she'd park the car there, and then I'd wait for her to get off at 5 o'clock, and we'd go up, eat, and then I'd run down to school and go to school. Did that
Wow.
night school for
10:30
4
at night.
years.
Yeah, we were young, so it
What?
wasn't too bad. I can remember being awful tired by
I would
Friday
imagine
night.
so. Just thinking that seems like you could do one of those things, but doing all three of being married and going to college and having a job.
Yeah, it was.
Yes. Yeah.
When I graduated, it was like a dream come true. I couldn't believe that it was really happening. It was really weird.
Get a couple more hours of sleep each night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So had you gone and completed college before he?
I went
started,
to
or-
business college
Okay.
while I was still in Baker, and then let's see, I can't remember what month it was, but it was not too long before we got married. I moved to Portland and got a job with Equitable Savings and Loan, and lived in a girls' hotel. That was the only way my mother would let me go to Portland by myself, is if I lived in an all-girl hotel kind of thing situation where it was like a curfew. Doors were locked at 10 o'clock at night, you know. So, yeah, so that's what I did, and then we got married in '67.
So you got me a couple of these. So did Portland State have particularly notable protests during the Vietnam War, or was it?
Yeah, it was
I did
pretty
not know that.
significant because they had, you know, pretty much the liberal arts students that were more, you know, on the bandwagon, so to speak, as far as the war, protesting the war and stuff. And then when that student got killed at Kent State, that sort of sparked a whole lot of discussion and protests in all kinds of colleges around the country. But Portland State especially was involved in that, and they had what they call a sit-in or a strike, and I can't remember the year, but it's all in that little report there. And so they basically, the way the Portland State University was set up is that it's kind of a downtown college. And so it was built right along where the park blocks come up through the main part of the downtown area. It's a nice little park area that
About
you
a
can,
6-block long park. So you had a park in the middle and roads on both sides.
and then there was
And
student
then the
housing.
school was on one side, and then apartments and stuff. But I think that then over the years, not even before I graduated, they started tearing down a lot of those apartments. They even went like a block or so past that, and they built new libraries, new science centers, new buildings, quite a bit and a lot of new stuff. So
But during that time,
they took over the park blocks. They had tents out there and
the protesters.
big
yeah.
sit-in.
Yeah, and so the police, they had some pretty good discussions, and it looked like they were going to disband the sit-in peacefully. But then when they got to the first aid tent, I don't know what, they had a tent set up, and they ordered them to take that down, and they refused. And that sparked a whole nother really serious protests where people were getting hurt. And so the police came in, and I think that was kind of the very first time that the Portland police had actually an organized SWAT team kind of thing. So, I mean, we stood in the Smith Center, which is like the main student center, and watched the whole thing happen, and the police in V formation just walked down the park blocks and started, and if they didn't move, they just started hitting them with their batons, and people went to the hospital and stuff. So it was scary. And I remember specifically an incident where, because they were not only fighting against the police, they were fighting other students that didn't agree with their point of view. So like, I walked downtown one day at lunchtime, and I was walking back. There was a little Volkswagen with a guy in there. All he was trying to do is get to his house, to his apartment. You know, he was a student there, and he wanted to get home. And these protesters just it was the scariest thing I've ever experienced, I think, as far as being right in the middle of a riot. But it was just, I was just standing there, and these protesters just came and just swarmed over this little Volkswagen, started bashing out his windows, and it was scary. So that's the kind of thing that was going on then. So, you know, when it becomes personal like that, where you know, up close and personal, it kind of changes your attitude about things, and you start taking a look at seriously, okay, what's really going on here? I mean, this is getting serious, and it's causing all kinds of division all over the country. So, yeah, I remember my neighbor, where I grew up in Baker, he was a Navy man, had served in World War II, and his son decided he didn't want anything to do with the war. So he just up and moved to Canada.
Wow.
And it really broke his dad's heart. I mean,
They had a lot of draft dodgers at that time. The people, you know, and you think about when I was in school in Portland State, I was a business administration major. So I was sort of kind of clean cut. You know, I wasn't artsy, I wasn't scientific, but there was like three groups in Portland State. There was the business majors, there was the scientist majors, and then there was the liberal arts. And I remember when I was in the National Guard, when I was in school, that paid for my school, luckily. I didn't have a GI loan. But one of the guys that was in the Army unit with me was a state patrolman. And I remember going out in the park blocks way before they started knocking the tents down, and he was walking around in, you know, jeans and kind of like one of the college students. And I walked up to him, you know, to say hi and, you know, how are you doing? Go away, go away. So there was a lot of police involved at that time, just checking people out. But it made you, after the riot, and they cleaned out the park blocks and stuff, took the tents down and arrested everybody and stuff. It kind of made you think, is the war right, you know, and what are we over there for? It didn't really change my mind because I was in the Guards and I was, you know, I would protect my country no matter what, but and never was called to do that.
and some of our classmates that we went to high school with died there, so, you know, that gets a little close to home too.
Yeah.
So,
And then when they did all the protesting and stuff, and then when the Army people came back, the United States treated them like, you know, dirt, pretty much. A lot of the Vietnam veterans just really got damaged when they came back, because it's like coming back to a country that they didn't want them. So it was a real
tragic war.
it was a tragic war.
Because you were in the National Guard, obviously that was the time when Russia was starting to, or the Soviet Union was starting to become, well, not really starting, was a big threat to the United States. Obviously all Americans were kind of concerned about that, but did you ever think that, you know, you might have to, you know, actually go and defend a fort and be worried about?
No, because actually the Russian thing happened kind of after Vietnam.
Okay.
Or no, it was.
Well, it was ongoing.
It was ongoing. It was what they called the Cold War, and it was like, you know, you did this, you did that. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. And, you know, just building up.
Yeah.
And it depended on the president at the time, too, how they dealt with Russia. You know, if the presidents that were hard line were the ones that caused everybody to think, well, you know, maybe we should build bomb shelters, and
Well, that was more like when we were younger.
that was the Cuba thing, wasn't it?
Well, that was something else. But I remember the bomb, in that article, they were about duck and cover. When we were in grade school, we actually had drills. It was kind of like a fire drill, only instead of going outside and you got under your desks or under a table or something, you know. Then they had a film that kind of explained what happened if we were to get bombed, and it was kind of surreal. I mean, it didn't seem real, and yet, you know, after World War II, you know, they were thinking Russia's not a friend, and we better be prepared. I'm sure it's very similar to what North Korea's going through right now.
That's what I was just thinking. It's a lot like just a lot of posturing. Not really anything happens, but it sure kind of scares you.
Yeah.
What could happen?
Right.
So you mentioned the different presidents. So do both of you remember when President Kennedy was?
Yeah. Very
That
vivid.
was a
Very
nice-
vivid memory of that.
I was in choir class.
Yeah, we were in school that day, and it was just amazing. You don't know the person personally, but he was such a, I guess, accessible president. I mean, it seemed like he was just so down to earth and really cared about the country, and so it just really impacted everybody. And I think about that often, you know, nowadays with all this horrible news you get on the news every day, the newscasters have become kind of callous almost, you know, it's like desensitized. But when that happened, I remember newscasters just breaking down and bawling like a baby on national news, you know. And so that it really did impact the whole country pretty seriously. Even little kids, you know, even I felt it really hard. And that wasn't the only one. It was, Lyndon Johnson, wasn't he? He almost got killed, and so did Nixon, and so did Reagan. So, you know,
Yeah.
it just became kind of a thing like, who's going to be next, you know? Yeah, especially when both of the Kennedys got killed. That was,
I remember.
Robert was such a
I remember it was, I think the first presidential election I remember was when Eisenhower got elected president.
Mm-hmm.
And
Was
then-
that 48? I'm trying to remember. When
No,
that
that was.
was. Was that more after?
That was.
It was more.
It was in
Okay.
the
Yeah,
50s.
50s, 52 or so.
Okay.
So I remember my mom and my grandpa getting into all these political discussions, and they liked Eisenhower.
That's, my dad was a Democrat and my mom was a Republican. And after that, before the election, the Democrats did something, or they used to stand for, you know, the American people, but now they're so liberal that it's just totally different. Unless, you know, anyway, he finally changed. He said, "I'm done with the Democratic Party," so he registered as a Republican. Was that way the rest of his life.
Yeah, I think my mom and dad were both, were opposite too for a while. Yeah. Mom was always a Republican.
Yeah, that's interesting because, and it's interesting now, like because Nixon was president for at least a large section of that time with Vietnam and everything, and we think of him as this evil, unpopular guy. And I was just looking up today, like he won 49 states.
Yeah.
It was kind of easy to be president for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Until he got.
I think
his
if he
tail
had,
hanger.
I think if he hadn't done what he did, and I don't know why he did it, he probably would have, you know, gone the full 8 years without a problem.
Yes, I do wonder. Well, obviously my mom brags about this too. She said, I grew up with Reagan. But
Yeah.
what was that like? Because obviously now he's kind of an untouchable icon, you know, like you said. What was it like growing up with it then? Was he as admired then as he is now, or a little more controversial? Or
I think in the beginning, people were skeptical, just like they are about Trump, you know, like, how can an actor be a president? You know, he's not qualified. But, you know, as he became of course, he was so much more eloquent as far as expressing himself
Yeah.
and how he believed, and it was very sincere. And so it wasn't long before people really started respecting him, and then he had some pretty tough things to handle, and he handled them what most people thought was the right way. So, yeah, I don't have as vivid, well, I think during that time, we were raising our kids, and we were, had our own business. We were just so kind of focused on our own little world. We've never been real politically active, I guess. So, but I just remember kind of having a sense of security, I guess, that he was in charge of things, and he had a lot of the same ideals that we did. So, yeah.
Well, he
What
was,
about you?
I pictured him as a person that was very sincere, and it was for all the people, not just one party. He was for America. Same thing Trump is going through, about making America great again. Reagan was, everything he did was for the American people. It wasn't for himself or make a name for himself or anything else, to leave a legacy. He really stood for the people. Kind of like Kennedy was the same thing. When he said, not do for your country, but do, what was it?
Ask what you can do
For
your country.
Your country. And that's really what it was all about. It wasn't just doing stuff for yourself, doing stuff for your country, and how it would help the country. So at 72 years, you go back, a long ways. And when we were just kids, the economy was starting to pick back up, and then we had the Korean War, which we went through it, but we weren't affected really by it. I remember my mom was in a WAC reserve in Baker, and she had to go up on top of one of the highest hotels in a room and watch for enemy aircraft. And my dad, was a forester, and his office down in the ranger station had pictures of plane silhouettes on the walls, so you could tell which was an enemy plane and which was a friendly plane. So our childhood was, I would say, probably a pretty what do you call it? We were not immature, but it was, our childhood, I think, was secure.
Well, yeah, in a way, but I think we were, during our elementary school and junior high years, I think we were more aware of kind of the instability, as far as threats to the country, direct threats. Kind of almost like now with Korea, what's going on with Korea. Yeah, I remember being aware of that more than during the 70s, 80s, 90s.
I guess, I was thinking, the word I was thinking was innocent. Until we got, into teenage years, and then you really started thinking more about what was going on around you and what was happening and stuff like that.
And how it affected the economy, and, what kind of career choices you were going to make. So, yeah.
Saying a lot of stuff. Gasoline at 22.5 cents a gallon.
Yeah. So, no.
We'd go to the grocery store once a week when we first got married, and if we spent $25 on groceries for a week, that was a lot of money. Because I think we budgeted like $100 a month for groceries. You spent that in one day.
Yeah.
You know, I think back and I think of all the stuff that we went through, and I think if it hadn't been for our parents and people around us and the churches that we went to and things like that we were constantly with and not really in that kind of situation, you might say, I think that helped quite a bit too. And I think a lot of, I would say probably more than 50–80% of our upbringing was because of our parents and what they did, how we respected them, and you know, how they raised us and brought us up and stuff.
And them having had to go through the war and stuff, I think that they were able to instill in us, you know, an appreciation for things that kind of has gotten lost through the generations. I can remember his mom, being the wife of a forester. It was pretty, you know, raising 3 kids and stuff. It was tough because they didn't get paid very well. And I remember when I met him and started to, and actually when we got married, she would show me how she survived during those years, you know, and how she got a lot of help from the extension service. And she showed me these little booklets that she got and how she could get by on a certain amount of money, you know, in a month, and how she did it, and step by step, you know, and just kind of giving me the tools to be resourceful instead of just being a consumer of as much as you could consume in your lifetime, but be more respectful of the opportunities that you have and how to make the best of them.
People see what you do. I mean, whether it's good or bad, but it's good if they see good things in you, because then, you know, they're grateful for who you are and what you do.